Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Josh Hennig and Ryan Rothstein filling in for Mike Gill on a Wednesday edition of the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Yes, Geoff Mosher is back with us in Football at 4, being brought to you by the Gallery Bar Booking Games and Ocean Casino Resort. Go to the Gallery, go to Ocean, go for the win. For more info, visit oceanac.com. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And Geoff Mosher is back as we are the day before the final preseason game, as Geoff joins us now on the Elite Acura Hotline. Geoff, welcome back. How you doing today?
What's up, fellas? How's it going?
It's going pretty good. So we got a bunch of stuff. We probably don't have enough time to get to everything with you here, so we'll do our best to lay it on with you because we had a lot of different topics throughout the day. So I'll start with this one, Geoff. What is really at stake for the game tomorrow? Because a lot of people realize no one from the Eagles is starting. So what is actually going to be the value of the game tomorrow?
Well, there's always, we talk about this every year. When you're playing in that final preseason game, what you're doing is trying to put as much good tape out there. You're not playing for a job with the team you're with. You're playing for a job for another team that you hope thinks you're a better fringe player than what they've got. So you're trying to put good tape. And it's happened many, many times. Guys who have performed well in preseason games and put good tape on for the Eagles or for whatever team have been waived by that team and then claimed by another team. So there are guys that are out there just trying to do the best they can to latch on with somebody, be it right after the cut down, sometime during the season, sometime, anytime, just put good tape out there. And then the second thing is for guys who are going to play early, there are some guys who are going to be on the Eagles this year that will play in this game, and they're just trying to get reps and get conditioning. I don't know if Zach Cunningham will play. We'll see about that. He's kind of elbowed his way up the linebacker totem pole quickly here, but he is a guy who wasn't at camp right away and was out a little bit. So he may get in there just to get a few reps in and then get out. Same with the Zacchaeus type of player, Olamide Zacchaeus. You just want to have guys who make sure that they're well conditioned for the season. A Tyler Steen, right? A rookie. Here's a guy who's going to be on the Eagles, not going to start right away, but really needs as many valuable game reps as possible, like real-time reps, to get himself prepared because he's developing right now. So he's a guy that could use this kind of environment to get better.
When you think about the guys who are going to try to play tomorrow night, talk to us about the cornerbacks, because I feel like that's the thing I'm going to be watching for, because when the Eagles cut Greedy Williams, I was surprised, Geoff, over the weekend, because Zach McPherson's done for the year. He tore his Achilles. So I thought, well, Greedy Williams might be a camp body at least, but apparently he was so bad, they were like, we'll just move forward what we got. So what is at stake for the corners? Because we know who the top guys are. It's Slay, Bradbury, Maddox, and then, I'm assuming based on listening to the Inside the Birds podcast or reading what you guys write at InsideTheBirds.com that Josh Jobe's making this team. So we already have 4 spots locked up. So how many guys are competing for a job potentially of the other guys?
Yeah, I don't know if it's more about how many guys are competing for how many cornerbacks, or who is just in general going to be the backup slot cornerback for Avonte Maddox, who's frequently hurt. It would have been Zach McPherson. He's gone. So now you're looking at Mario Goodrich has been the backup slot for a couple of weeks now. Well, he's hurt. So now he's out of that equation. So now you've got Josh Jobe, who's competing as an outside corner. And by the way, that's why you shouldn't be surprised that Greedy Williams is no longer the team, because Josh Jobe has had pretty much a stranglehold on that position about 2 weeks into camp. So there is an opening, though, as you mentioned, for at least a number 5 corner who you would love to be able to play the slot. But at this point, you just need probably a guy that you feel comfortable with. So Eli Ricks, I imagine, will get a pretty good look. Mekhi Garner will get some pretty significant snaps. And, those would be sort of my leaders in the clubhouse to make the 53, one of those guys, if they're going to go ahead and keep that extra corner now that Zach McPherson is injured. I mean, they have been working James Bradbury at the nickel spot. We talked about that the last time I was on Monday, so I'm sure there was some intent there. But I think the Eagles players have to force the Eagles brass to say, yes, we should keep a fifth corner, right? As opposed to we're keeping five just because that's like a number that we usually keep. And by the way, the conversation really will continue past the waiver if either of those guys make it, but somebody gets cut that the Eagles feel has good inside-outside versatility, veteran corner, then you would have to look for that to be an area that they upgrade after the cut-down day as well.
Moshe, obviously a lot of talk right now is surrounding the safety position. Is it enough? Who's going to win the battle? What's it going to look like on the depth chart when it's all said and done? But we discussed this a little bit earlier in the show. Just want your 2 cents on it. I mean, I said in Howie I trust, right? And if this position is not looking up to par and it's looking a little bit shallow, to put it nicely, I mean, let's not rule out Howie Roseman looking to upgrade this position via trade at some point, whether it's in the next couple of weeks, whether it's before the deadline, week 3 or 4. But whenever it is, you get where I'm going. What's your assessment on that? Obviously, that could be a likely option, right?
Certainly, 100%. Obviously, we don't have to look too far in the past to find an example. Just last year, they realized that safety was a position that was going to hurt them, and they went out and got C.J. Gardner-Johnson. They're in a little bit of a different spot right now because they can look and say our top 3 guys are in some form or fashion: Terrell Edmunds, Reed Blankenship, and Sidney Brown. 2 of those 3, we kind of like how they've developed, right? They like what they've seen from Reed Blankenship in year 2, and I have to imagine they're pretty happy with what they're seeing in Sidney Brown. Know he's going to make rookie mistakes, but in general, they drafted him for a reason. Last year, it felt like the cupboard was really bare, as far as what they had at that position, and not a whole lot of young talent on the come up. So I only say that to say, I don't know if Howie will urgently feel the need to get a safety the way he got C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I can imagine he's more maybe looking for somebody out there that could help the team, that's not going to cost like a 3rd or a 4th round pick. I mean, you never know. If a guy who's really good becomes available and you think you can get him for the long term, yeah, it makes sense. But in this case, I would be thinking that they're looking for someone to just be maybe better than a Terrell Edmunds if someone gets released, or a 4th safety that might be better than Kevon Wallace or Justin Evans, but is still not very costly and you're not married to for several years.
We're still getting the narrative from certain listeners and Eagles fans of, Jalen Hurts, the verdict is still out. His support around him last year was phenomenal. And, that's why we saw the success statistically that we saw last season. And, I just sort of shake my head. And, I bring this up just to get into your thoughts on how much better can Jalen get this upcoming year? Are they going to, really just unleash him this year? Are we going to see an even better version? I don't even know if that's possible. I mean, if we get the same version of Jalen Hurts that we saw last year, I'm personally completely okay with that. But I am intrigued and excited to see how much better this dude can actually get, Moshe.
I know. I'm like you, Ryan. I'm sort of wrestling with the internal conflict of saying he's a young quarterback who stormed onto the scene, and if he's this young and was able to make that much of a jump from year 1 to year 2 starting, imagine what he can do right year 2 to year 3 with all that knowledge last year, all that experience. However, there is a little bit of as you're pointing out, a realistic viewpoint that you sort of have to at least consider, in that it's very rare somebody puts together like an MVP-like season like that and then just does it again the next year. And then, the people who do that year after year after year, they're like Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes, or they're, just like an Aaron Donald at defensive tackle. It's really hard to do that. And we've seen a lot of players who are very good, not maybe the elite of the elite, but good, have like peak years and come back down a little bit, then go back up. So I'll just say this, after watching him in training camp, he's looked amazing. And I think he's got all the elements around him between the offensive line and the playmakers, and then the added weaponry at running back to actually have as good, if not better, statistical season as last year. So I would put my money more on Jalen Hurts being as good or better this coming year than I would dropping off.
Talking with Geoff Mosher here on Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. You can follow Geoff on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it now, at Geoff P. Mosher over there on social media. Geoff, you mentioned about Jalen Hurts. I got to ask you about the other quarterback situation behind him, because we know Marcus Mariota is going to be the backup, but Tanner McKee is really making, I think he's performed better than I even expected him to personally. I mean, I thought him and Ian Book would compete for the third quarterback job, and we know that in today's NFL with that new rule that you have to have multiple quarterbacks, available on game day now. So, what is your thought on the Tanner McKee situation? I mean, is he a guy that, has locked himself into that quarterback 3 on this roster? Because we know some teams are going to try to have the QB on the practice squad in the past instead of on the roster. The Eagles used to do that. So, where is Tanner McKee, and what are your thoughts on him at this point?
Yeah. All right. So first of all, to get to the first point you made, there is only one X. You're correct about that, and may he rest in peace. Secondly, I refuse to call that platform X. I'm sorry. There's just one X. Secondly, on Tanner McKee, what he's done is made it very difficult for the Eagles to say, yeah, we like this guy. We're going to waive him, pass him through waivers, then put him on our practice squad. I always make fun of people who overreact to running backs who do great. And people say, you can't cut him. You can't. Henry Josie's and all those, and wide receivers too, right? You can cut those guys, get them through waivers pretty easily because everybody's got a great running back in camp, or a running back who performs. Quarterbacks, that's a whole different animal. And you always have to worry about those teams that know that they're going to be 4-11 this year. Like, the Cardinals, 4-13. I'm sorry, I did bad math there. 4-13. You have to worry about them trying to steal young quarterbacks.
Right.
So what Tanner McKee has done for the Eagles has made it very difficult for them to think that they can just bring him back on the practice and not have 3 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster. And they're fine with carrying 3 quarterbacks on the 53. They did it last year. The only thing is Book was a useful guy on the scout team because can run around, he's athletic, he can simulate whenever you're playing like a Russell Wilson or an Anthony Richardson or somebody else who's going to do the same thing. Tanner McKee could not simulate any of those guys. And so they may feel now the need to have Tanner McKee on the 53 for development, but then bring in another quarterback on the practice squad that can run the look team when they are facing mobile quarterbacks. But I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue for them to want to keep the third quarterback because they've done it before and they like what they've seen in the games. And he's obviously worth developing, but there's really, to me, it would be unrealistic for them to try to waive him and bring him back on the practice squad.
When you think about also the next position I want to ask you about is, we were getting some questions earlier today, Geoff, about running back, about what's going on with that. And it's looking more and more like Kenny Gainwell is the guy at this point at running back. So my question then is, if Gainwell's the guy, Geoff, what does that mean for Swift and Penny? Because I think a lot of people would assume those guys were brought in here to have roles. So if Gainwell has a larger than expected role, at least for those of us who are not in the Eagles building, what does that mean for the other guys?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that Gainwell is the guy in how we all view someone who's the guy, like whether it's, Jonathan Taylor or Derrick Henry or even like Travis Etienne, who is going to lose a few carries to some other guys throughout the season. What's pretty obvious is that DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny don't practice a whole lot because the Eagles know that they have injury histories and the Eagles want to use these guys. So they're kind of what I would describe as on bubble wrap here throughout the preseason and in the camp, even in the joint practices, you don't see him a whole lot. You see a lot of Kenny Gainwell because he's young and he can handle the workload. And you see a lot of Boston Scott because why not, right? So I'm not ready to kind of take what I've seen here in camp and preseason. I think this is one of those instances where you can get tricked a little bit if you don't see the forest through the trees here. I'm not saying Kenneth Gainwell is not going to be a prominent factor in the running game. They like him, clearly. It's a situational backfield. They like him in 2-minute drill and 4-minute drill in goal line. They like him in short yardage, which is really weird because he's not a guy who came out of college that screamed short yardage back. He was a guy who caught a lot of passes. He screamed third down back, right? But for whatever reason, he hasn't really been an explosive running back at the NFL level, but he has been very good in short yardage. In fact, as we talked about on the podcast recently, I think PFF or another outlet had him described as the most efficient short yardage runner in the NFL last year, which is sort of mind-boggling. But so he'll have a role, but he's obviously going to have to share that role running with Rashad Penny and catching with DeAndre Swift.
What do you think the reps are going to look like? Impossible question to answer, but just the best of your ability, Moshe. Obviously, we'll see once the season gets underway and we get into October, November, and how that's shaping up in the backfield. But you can really tie in just the offensive identity into this question. Like, what's the run game going to look like? What's the preferred method to the madness here? How much different is it going to look, if at all? Just speak to all of that as we're on this topic.
No, I mean, it'll certainly look different than the last year or two when they were basically a 2-man backfield or 1-man backfield. Last year, they were a Miles Sanders backfield, but Kenny Gainwell got his touches. 2 years ago, it felt more like a 2-person backfield. Obviously, they're going to be more than that. It's going to be more committee. It's going to be, like I said, situational. So what I suspect is the number of touches and carries from week to week to week might vary a little bit based on the opponent and what scheme they have in place for that opponent on a weekly basis. If they feel like whoever they're playing is really vulnerable to, pass catching running backs, can't match up with them, then you'll probably see DeAndre Swift involved early on, right, to try to get the ball moving through the air to a running back. And then if you're up by 14 to 17 points there in the second half, you're probably giving the ball to Rashad Penny a whole lot there to finish it off. So, and then there may be weeks where they think a team is really good in the back end, but struggles up front, and they want to pound away with Gainwell and Penny for the first quarter, and then, get the RPOs and the read options and get Jalen Hurts in the game. We saw this last year. Do you remember the game against the Jaguars where they were struggling, and then all of a sudden they just decided to run the ball a lot and then ran away from the Jags because it was working? So it's hard to really pin them down on what they're going to do. And I think that they're even deeper and more multi-dimensional to just kind of decide week to week where they think they can hit the opponent hardest.
Dallas Goedert's interesting to me as well. I mean, we talk about Jalen Hurts and what type of step can he take. We talk about the backfield and what type of steps he can take. We always look at best wide receiver duos in the NFL and Devonte Smith and his growth and obviously the evolution of A.J. Brown here in Philly. But, Dallas Goedert, how is he going to be used? And, obviously how much better can he continue to get?
He's a weapon. He's one of their best screen weapons, which is hard to believe, but for a tight end. But he's as good as any other pass-catching tight end at making extra yardage in general, but especially on the screens. But you're right. And from what I've seen this offseason or this preseason, the rhythm and the symmetry that Jalen Hurts has with A.J. Brown and Devonte Smith feels like it's growing. Isn't that scary? Feels like it's growing. Devonte Smith, in my opinion, might be ready to enter the top 5 terrain. I actually think he's a better, more polished overall wide receiver than A.J. Brown, but we're splitting hairs because I think A.J. Brown's as good as it gets as well. I think Devonte just catches everything, and that's the little bit of the difference. So Dallas will still be a big part of the offense. I just don't know that it's going to – 2 years ago, we felt when it was just Devonte as a rookie, no A.J. Brown, that the offense should run through Dallas Goedert because he was their best weapon. He's their third best weapon now. So he's sort of going to be like what Kelsey was when the Chiefs had Tyreek Hill also. A really good weapon, but sometimes, in fact, if you look at Kelsey's stats, they were better last year because there was no Tyreek Hill. For Dallas, he's just going to have to live with the fact that there's going to be times where he probably disappears, but then times where he's a major, major impact in the passing game.
Geoff, before we let you go, I got to ask you, because we talked about a couple people yesterday, because Ryan brings up the duos thing. Deshaun Jackson, he says that A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. And, the Twitter X people, they were all going after Djax because they were saying, well, what about Miami and what about Cincinnati? So, Jeff, do you see any lies in what Deshaun Jackson said, or do you think he's just being a homer there?
Probably being a little bit of a homer, but I don't see any lies either, though. I mean, I don't. I mean, I know Devonte Smith has to go out there and have that kind of 1,500-yard season or 8-10, whatever. I mean, maybe he doesn't because he was really good last year. We could be splitting hairs. I think the Miami duo is more explosive. There's no question about it. When you put them together, you can't match that change of direction that they have and sort of second-gear explosion. But I still think that the Eagles duo is more versatile, and they'll catch everything. They're bigger. They're strong, way more in the contested catch realm than probably the Miami duo. And then what was the other one that was
Cincinnati?
Cincinnati. Cincinnati's good too. I mean, it's right up there. You can make that argument. Then you know what? Maybe that'll all be settled this year. But I see very, very few flaws with what the Eagles have, which is, by the way, in itself an amazing, amazing conversation for any Eagles fan, especially one who's over 40 or 50 years old and who's gone like decades. Right? There's never been a time where two Eagles receivers this good were playing together in their prime. Carmichael and Quick never played together
Not in their prime, yeah.
No. So if you're an Eagles fan and you're over 50, this has to be like a freaking godsend to you to watch these guys play because you'd never see nothing like it as an Eagles fan.
No, absolutely not. That's for sure. I mean, even T.O., I don't remember who the number 2 receiver was for T. Was that Reggie Brown?
It was Pinkston.
Pinkston? Yeah.
Pinkston and FredEx.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, Freddie Mitchell was a slot guy. I mean,
Right. It was, nothing close. It was just basically T.O.
Yeah, poor Brian Westbrook almost got forgotten for a season. So.
Well, he literally became in 2004 after Owens hurt her like their best receiving weapon. And then in 2005, you could argue before T.O. got suspended, he was actually having a better year than 2004. People go look at the stats. It was amazing. Owens and Westbrook were that was the receiving tandem.
Yeah.
It's absolutely wild. Absolutely crazy. The history of this franchise when you break it down. But you know what? Devonte Smith now owns the record for most receptions by a wide receiver in a season. And there's a possibility he has even more this year. All that and more over at InsideTheBirds.com, the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher joined us here on the Elite Acura Hotline. Follow him on Twitter at Geoff P. Mosher. He will be back next Monday to recap it all. Tomorrow, Andrew DeCecco will preview the preseason game, and then Adam Kapp will recap it all on Friday right here on Football at 4. Geoff, great stuff today.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you.
And Football at 4 is brought to you by the Gallery Bar Booking Games and Ocean Casino Resort. Go to the Gallery, go to Ocean, go for the win. For more info, visit theoceanac.com. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLE.